Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast with Barry Zito is brought to you by Express Feedback for Good. We've been telling you about our initiative, our project, our partnership with Express Feedback for Good for a few weeks now. And listen, this is a great opportunity for you to partner with us through Express Feedback for Good and help us reach our goal in our ministry for $50,000 of funding and impact. And all you have to do is sign up. It's free, it's confidential, it takes a minute a day, and it helps us reach our goal of $50,000 of funding for Sports Spectrum. Here's how it works. Go to sportspectrum.com. That's our website, sportspectrum.com, or any of our social media channels, or you can simply text the letters EFG to 31996. And you'll be entered, you'll be in, and then all you have to do is take a minute a day, 1 minute every day for the next 30 days to just provide feedback on products that you care about, and you're in. It helps create up to $50,000 of funding for us at Sports Spectrum, which of course we'll use to continue spreading the gospel through the lens of sport. Sign up today at our website, sportspectrum.com, or texting EFG to 31996. Really excited to have Barry Zito on the podcast today. If you're a baseball fan, you know who Barry Zito is. He was selected in the first round of the 1999 MLB Draft by the Oakland A's. He made his debut a year later, July 22nd, 2000, against Anaheim, and played with the A's for 7 seasons, from 2000 to 2006. He won the 2002 AL Cy Young Award, 23-5 with a 2.75 ERA in that 2002 year for Mr. Zito. And then he signed a very rich contract in 2006, late 2006, $100 million plus to go to the San Francisco Giants, where he pitched from 2007 to 2013. And it wasn't all roses and blue skies for Barry during his time with the Giants. However, he did win 2 World Series in San Francisco, including a memorable 2012 run that we talk about here on the podcast. In 2017, he was inducted into the National Italian American Sports Hall of Fame. He released an EP in 2017 as well called No Secrets. He's a musician. And just this past September 17th, Barry's new book, Curveball, How I Discovered True Fulfillment After Chasing Fortune and Fame, was released. And we're going to talk about Barry's new book here on the podcast. Take a listen to Barry Zito, former MLB pitcher, 3-time All-Star, 2-time World Series champion, 2002 AL Cy Young Award winner, on Sports Spectrum. Barry, welcome to the podcast.
All right. Thanks for having me, man. It's
Absolutely,
great.
man. You've lived quite the baseball career, the baseball life, and so many of you will know you for that, of course, a Cy Young Award winner, World Series, All-Star, all of that. But now you go from pitcher to author, and you also are a musician, and we'll talk about the musician side in a little bit too. But you're the author of this new book called Curveball. It's out now, How I Discovered True Fulfillment After Chasing Fortune and Fame. Tell us about this book and the reason maybe why you decided to write it today.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I went into this whole major league dream, as they call it, as we all had as kids, or most of us, and just kind of being told, by my father, who had the best intentions, that this is the end all be all. I mean, if you achieve this, then that's it, man. And so I didn't achieve everything I wanted to achieve, but what I did realize is I came up kind of with this empty feeling, even after some of the most, exhilarating career moments of a Cy Young or winning a World Series, and realizing that after the initial spurt of, wow, this is incredible, kind of back to baseline. Okay, what's next? And I never thought that would be the case, whether it was getting a huge paycheck or, making $1 million, buying my favorite sports car, all these boxes we want to check as people, and then realizing, man, this isn't filling me up the way I thought it would, kind of going into it. And so that was a pretty, unnerving feeling.
You write in your book a lot about your faith journey. You detail a lot about your baseball journey, which I love, but you write about the very complicated relationship you just referred to him with your father, Joe. And interestingly enough, I had a very complicated relationship with my father, and his name is Joe. So it's like,
Wow.
I was relating to it right away. But tell us about your dad and sort of that journey with him, and why you call it complicated, which I thought was an interesting word.
It is. And my father had an interesting journey himself. I mean, he grew up in the Bronx, and he was, a child of wedlock where, a man actually raped his 14-year-old stepdaughter, and my dad was the product of that. And so he was hidden away as a baby, in the back of the house, and they were ashamed of him. So he kind of started out that way. And he went on to become an incredible musician and, conducting for Nat King Cole, and, huge success. But his journey to be worthy, to be relevant, to have value in the world, really just transferred onto me. And he never had a strong faith, either, a strong foundation. And so as a result, I grew up without a foundation, really ever thinking that anything, was more important than baseball, more important than what I do in the world. And so that was, that helped me in a lot of ways to be so focused. But in the end, it really came back to bite me, because baseball ended up being my God, so to speak.
Yeah. Tell me about that journey. You say, especially in the back of the book, about that pursuit for excellence as an athlete. When you're at the highest level, like you were, winning World Series, Cy Young Award. I mean, you're the best pitcher in the American League in 2002 when you get the Cy Young Award. So you're at the highest level, but achieving and trying to get to that moment, I guess. Can you walk us through what that was like through your teenage years and into going to college, and just that the constant strive for achievement, and somehow at some point it still isn't enough for you? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I would say that, being raised by my father, who was always just trying to, give me the best start in life. And, he was older when he had me, so he wanted to make sure I was set more or less, when he was gone.
Yeah.
So his intentions were very pure, but the way it manifested in me was I felt like the only thing that mattered was win or lose, and that I didn't really have this intrinsic value outside of, my successes and failures. And so that was great while I had my head down and, focused high school, college, coming up quickly through the minors, and, having quick success in the big leagues. Having my identity based on my success was fine, because it was always success. But when it turned sour for me is when I started pitching poorly on the field. So not only was I, unable to find my baseball identity, I really had no identity greater than that as a person. And I think my father never planned on that. But what I realized is I just had a very, lopsided perspective. Baseball was, it was who I was. I mean, you hear these people say, well, it's not who I am, it's what I do.
Yeah.
And I would hear people say that early in my career and just think, man, this guy's not focused. He needs to figure some things out here.
Right.
That's not true at all. Right.
So take me through the moments where, well, there's so much, because just reading your book, which is a fantastic book, again, it's called Curveball, and it's out now. You write very poignantly about your baseball career, signing that big contract in December of 2006, going to the Giants from Oakland, not too far, obviously staying in the Bay Area, but that contract and that label, I guess, the highest paid player in baseball for its time. And suddenly you come into this incredible fortune to go along with the fame. Not that you weren't making good money beforehand, but now this is a ridiculous number, if you want to call it that. And how that changes you at all. Does that change you? Tell me about, like, when you signed that contract and kind of how baseball was viewed by you, I guess, after you signed that deal.
Yeah, well, my father had always told me and really planted seeds, as he put it, in me, that I was going to achieve these things in the game. And so, what I learned was to always listen to my father and never really listen to my own instinct, my own gut. And so that was something I never really developed until much later when he was gone. But, as we were coming up, when I say we, because that's what it was a lot of the time, we were kind of like a team, even though I was the one out there. But after those 7 years in Oakland, I had just over 100 wins and had never missed a start. So I knew that, I was probably going to get the highest contract in the free agent market that year. And when I did, there really was no sense of gratitude. That's the crazy thing, because I didn't have a foundation, like I said, of anything more than baseball. So it was more entitlement. And I don't mean entitlement that I wasn't working hard, but I was expecting that. And it was never a gift, and I remember specifically someone came up in 2003, which was my fourth season. They came up to me in a hotel on the road and they said, "Barry, you must feel so blessed to have that curveball. It's so amazing. And, where does that even come from? And you just must be so grateful." And I remember getting upset with this woman and saying, "Well, you don't know what you're talking about. I've been working so hard since I was 7. I mean, I deserve this curveball, and that just shows you what my headspace was. It was, this is all about me, and, I deserve this. And that can be good for a little bit. But when I realized that I, in fact, was not getting the success that I thought I deserved, my entire worldview just crumbled. I mean, it was built on sand. It was, man.
Were you a person that a lot of people wanted to be around during those years? I don't mean to ask it such an abrasive way, but how did you consider yourself, say, before your faith began to become real to you, as a person to be around?
The weird thing is that it was never this kind of overt arrogance. I mean, people probably would be surprised to read my book, like people that knew me, like, wow, I didn't know he was that arrogant. Yeah. Because since I was being essentially driven by opinions of others, something I later went to 12-step for, being codependent on everybody around me, and really being defined by the opinions of everybody, which is, that was what I learned from having a father whose opinion defined me. So what I ended up doing was, having this disguise where I was definitely a nice guy and I'm still a people person today, but inside, I felt superior to everybody because I was always, being kind of raised to realize, oh, I'm special and I'm different and things like that. And those are things that ended up becoming this very subtle, arrogance. And of course, then when I'm pitching worse than anybody on the team in 2010 and getting left off the World Series roster, that doesn't really work anymore. Those two things don't actually add up anymore. So, well, I'm actually not only not superior. I mean, these guys are winning a World Series and I'm not even allowed on the field. So, and that's truly when everything changed for me.
We're going to talk about that rock bottom moment in a second. Barry Zito is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. I want to ask you about your mom. You haven't really mentioned her much, but I know, and you write this beautifully in the book, there are 2 poignant moments here with both your mom and your dad that intersect faith with your life. And they're unbelievable, really, when you think about those moments, because both your parents have now passed on. It was 2008 when your mom passed, and I know she had a real spiritual conversion before her death that you write about. Can you share about that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So my mother was raised by a woman, her mom, who was in a happy, Christian marriage with 4 kids in the 60s and had a visitation, as she calls it in her book, by this ancient being named Babaji that came, to tell her that she was supposed to start a New Age spiritual center. So my grandmother then divorced her husband, started this center called Teaching of the Inner Christ. And that's what my mother was raised in. And that's also what I was raised in. And so, I grew up with my mom being a pastor in that New Age church. And, that New Age belief, like most New Age spiritual beliefs, it's up to me completely to get to God. It's up to me completely to be my own God, essentially, and to figure out my own life and to create the life that I want. And so my mother, 2 weeks before she died, she was in a hospital and she broke down crying to me. And she said, "I'm so sick of all the pressure to create my life perfectly like I want it." She said, "I just can't do it alone anymore." And that's when she asked Jesus to come into her heart. And it was really incredible. And so she died, 2 weeks later, having surrendered to Jesus. Really beautiful.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I think of the story of the thief on the cross in the book of Luke and just, man, it doesn't matter if you've walked your whole life against him. Like, as long as we're still breathing, there's still hope. There's still an opportunity here to begin that walk like your mom did a couple weeks before her passing. And I know your dad had a pretty interesting moment too that was, I mean, just so beautifully written by you. It was June of 2013. So we're kind of bouncing around in dates here because I do want to go back to that rock bottom baseball moment. But take us through what happened with your father as well.
Yeah. So my father, oddly, he kind of developed, like so many of these days, developed their own religion, right? They're their own faith, their own spirituality, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Kind of the postmodern, I determine my own truth. My father was raised Catholic as an Italian growing up in the Bronx. And I guess around his late teens, early 20s, he developed his own spirituality that really lined up with my mother's. And so he was always, of the belief that it's fully up to me to manifest and determine the life that I want with no help from anybody else. And, he had a very tragic stroke where his heart stopped for 8 minutes. And this is, in 2010, literally the same month that I was off the playoff roster. But he ended up in bed for 2 years, unable to get out of bed, and actually had both legs amputated as a result of, having the blood not go to his feet and his lower legs for 8 minutes. So he had a really rocky ride. And, a couple months before he died, he actually gave his life to Christ. And
wow.
I mean, it's just like, it's fairy tale. It's crazy. But I think my mom, when she said, I'm sick of the pressure, I mean, that really sums it up for me, is that this worldview where we create our own reality is awesome as long as our reality is pretty darn good. But when it's not, and then we say we point the finger at ourselves that now it's my fault, this is happening to me, that is absolutely untrue. And that is not a good place to be in by any means.
Ugh. What did both of those moments with your mom and your dad? I know by the time your dad had passed in 2013, your faith was becoming more real to you and had become more real to you. But what did those moments do for you as looking back now, I guess, as far as how it influenced your faith?
Yeah, I mean, it just nothing surprises me, man. I mean, it's just crazy. I guess when you accept the fact that God is just so incredible and mind blowing and such a mystery, and I might only know 1% about him, I have to always allow myself that element to be surprised. So I say I'm not surprised at how God works. Really, it's mind blowing, but I'm expecting my mind to be blown. And so it just makes me giggle to myself, sometimes of how incredible, God is and his plan is for all of us. I mean, it's just, it's hard to put into words.
We'll continue our conversation with Barry Zito in just a second. But again, I want to tell you about Express Feedback for Good because it's such a unique way for you to partner with us through Express Feedback for Good to help make an impact, a financial impact, and contribute up to $2 towards our $50,000 goal by simply giving a single piece of feedback. It takes about a minute of your time, and we're trying to generate that $50,000 for us at Sports Spectrum to be able to continue to bring content like this podcast, our magazine, of course, and our website and the articles that you see there to you. All you have to do is sign up. It's free. All your information is kept confidential, and you spend a minute a day. That's it, a minute a day for 30 days. Provide your feedback on something that is important to you, organizations that's important to you, and then you're in. That's it. So here's how you can do it. Go to our website, sportspectrum.com, or simply text the letters EFG to 31996. And like I said, a minute a day, you personally can create up to $200 of impact by simply providing your opinion about real experiences, about organizations and products that you care about. I hope you'll consider joining us at Express Feedback for Good and Sports Spectrum, and together we can bring real impact to our ministry here at Sports Spectrum and expand our ability to share the gospel of Jesus Christ through the lens of sports. Let's get back to our conversation with Barry Zito here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. Barry, in the very beginning, in your introduction in the book, Curveball, it's out now, the new book, you write, in Jeremiah 17:9, God said, "The human heart is the most deceitful of all things and desperately wicked. Who really knows how bad it is?" That's the New Living Translation. And then you say, during those waking nightmare days in the fall of 2010, I was beginning to get an unfiltered glimpse of my own heart for the first time, and I did not like what I saw. So take us to 2010 and go back on the baseball field and that deceitful heart and what was happening. Because baseball wise, that's a difficult thing for a person to deal with, having be left off a World Series roster. But there's a lot more layers to this story, isn't there, as far as rock bottom and this difficult time for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a couple, just 2007, I come over, I signed, this contract for $126 million. I end up having, my first losing season of my career that first year, and it just basically gets worse every year. So by the end of my fourth season, 2010, I'm probably 20 or 30 games under 500, meaning less wins than losses. Less wins than losses. And after that, it came down to, we win the NL West on the last day of the season, and our team's, celebrating on the field. And I started thinking, wait, how many pitchers are we bringing to the playoffs? So as we're running around the field, I start going, oh man, I mean, I literally stopped feeling like I was even on the Giants anymore, even though I was running around with celebrating, this win. And then right after that, the manager calls me in and says, this is very hard for me, but we can only take 4 starters, and I got to go with my best 4 guys. And so I just, everything, those moments in our life, right, when we just slow motion, we can't even make words. We're so overtaken with emotion and fear, and our biggest fears coming to life, basically. And so he gave me the option, the manager, hey, why don't you just go home, pack up, we'll see you in spring training next year, regroup, take a breather. And I'm like, wait, but you guys are going to go try to win a World Series, and I'm just going to be at home watching you on TV? That's not working. And so I kind of convinced him almost to keep me around and have me work out in case someone got hurt. And that was just because I couldn't even fathom leaving my team. But I ended up just sitting in the dugout for the next, 30 days, watching my team win the World Series, which I wanted to win since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And, ashamed to admit, but I did in the book that I was rooting against them. I wanted them to lose so I could get out of this misery and go home. So yeah, that's basically when my entire worldview fell apart.
Jeez. And then that testimony of faith starts to come into play. You mentioned your mom. We talked about your dad. But for you, I know your wife, Amber, had a huge influence on your walk with the Lord beginning. So take us through really your conversion, your testimony.
So the way I think all of us have those moments when our head finally cracks open just a little bit, and the light kind of starts to shine through that little crack. Not that we're new people at that moment, but it just allows us the question mark of maybe there's more than what I'm seeing right now. And so for me, that moment was when I went back home to West Hollywood. I'm up in that mansion at the top of Sunset Plaza and, on top of the world, so to speak, but really living in my own nightmare. And so I started going to a 12-step group called CODA, which essentially, it wasn't for alcohol abuse. It was for abusing the opinions of other people, really. And, it was, my life has become unmanageable and I'm powerless over other people's opinions. And step 2 was willing to admit there's a power greater than me that can restore me my sanity. And for me, that was something I was never open to. There's no power greater than me. I am the higher power.
Yeah.
And it sounds a little crazy, but, and I think a lot of us, because we fight for control of our lives, we tend to want to believe that we are in full control. But then we realize disturbingly that we're not, most definitely, at certain points in our life. And so that's when my head went, oh, maybe there's something more. And, meeting my wife, who prayed to a God that sounded like a friend that she was talking to, that was totally new. That wasn't praying to a force. Like I used to always pray to a force. So yeah, my wife, praying to a loving father was just such a new concept. And I wanted more of that. And that really started out this hunger and this intrigue.
How did it evolve for you? For me, my conversion was not an immediate one. It needed about a year of marinating, if you want to call it that, of just searching, of reading the Bible, of asking a lot of questions. What was yours like?
No, it was that exactly. It was probably about a year or just under myself, because, all that happened to me in October of 2010. And, I started dating my wife at that point. And so, it wasn't until the next season, late in the season, after going to Bible study with the team and really just kind of sitting in on it and not really saying much, but just listening and understanding what grace is. It's undeserved, and that we're saved not by, works, but by grace. And that was, the fact that I can't earn something is a little disconcerting. It's a little disconcerting because, wait, I'm a type A, like I'm going to get this done. But it's like, wait, stop trying. You're good. As long as you can say you can't do it alone, that's when everything changes. And of course, it took many years for me to admit that. But when I finally did, this other power, named Jesus Christ, came in, and my life has been different ever since. And I also know, for me, I think it was right, because I searched probably 10 or 12 different religions and spiritualities over 15 years. And whenever something didn't work, I moved on to the next one. Wow. And so here I am, almost 9 years in, and I haven't moved on anywhere. So that just tells me, okay, whatever this is actually really working.
Yeah, it's real, obviously. That's awesome. Tell me about going back onto the baseball field now in this new spiritual conversion of faith in Christ, and then take us to 2012. I love this World Series Game 1, 2012, because 2 years after you're at the lowest point and you're left off the roster, suddenly you're pitching in Game 1 of the World Series for the San Francisco Giants. So take us through that and maybe what that was like, and then getting to Game 1. And I laugh because I think it's just an incredible story.
It's funny. I mean, it really is, just because it's like, here I was so desperate for redemption, to redeem myself in front of this city, right, that more or less just hated me. I mean, I would go out to bars and restaurants, and people would, yell F Zito, from across the room. I mean, it's, get out of here, loser, like things like that. So, and then here I am in the World Series pitching. But for me, when I was able to finally let go of my need for the perfect result, or for the win, or for the redemption, or to prove myself, to San Francisco, that's when everything happened. And it's like, he who gives receives more than, he could ever want. And so I was just wanting to give my best to the game of baseball, instead of take everything from baseball to give me what I needed, from my ego standpoint. And so I went into those games in the playoffs of 2012, literally like, God, this is yours. You've taken me this far. I'm not going to be an idiot anymore and be hard-headed and say this was all about me. Whatever you want, I'm just going to go out there and throw that ball the best I can. And, if I'm giving up 10 runs today, then there's probably a lesson I need to learn. And, if you want to bless me with a great game, then I'm down for that too, of course. And so I ended up pitching these really just 2 games, one in the NLCS against the Cardinals, and one in the Game 1 of the World Series, that essentially just transformed the entire previous 6 years of my career, which is pretty mind-blowing that it took 2 games to reverse 6 years of terrible performance.
Yeah, it's incredible how sports can do that. And that Game 1 in the World Series, it was you against Verlander, who's still dominating and probably going to win a Cy Young this year. It's incredible to watch him pitch. What stands out? Yeah. What stands out for you from that day? Like, just going, I love the sports side of it, going on the mound, throwing a game, an incredible game. You're winning the game. You come away, you get your ring, the ring that probably means more to you, I would imagine, 2012 than 2010. So take me through just on the field and preparation, and just knowing something good's happening today.
It's funny, because being raised in a positive thinking, positive mindset family, and I never thought success at anything was possible unless I was completely confident, assured of myself, knowing that I was going to go in there and win the game. Mm-hmm. And ironically, I didn't have any of those thoughts before the World Series. All I thought was, this is crazy. I have no idea what's happening, and I literally don't even want any part of it. I just want to keep my hat down, focus on the catcher's mitt, and do what I know I can do, which is, wind up and throw that ball the best I can. And whatever happens, 60 feet from here where that hitter's at is totally out of my control. And so it was literally just total detachment that led to my talent being able to surface, instead of getting in the way of it with all my egotistical needs for approval and validation. I was able to just say, this is baseball. I'm having fun. And how am I going to beat Verlander? There's no way I could work out the math on that one. I mean, that should have never happened. Yeah. But, we ended up sticking it to them, and we swept the Tigers in the World Series, and the rest is history,
What was that celebration like for you when you're in that locker room and you guys are world champs?
Oh, that was surreal. I mean, the moment that made the most impact on me, I'll never forget, was after we won Game 4 in Detroit. I was doing an interview in the hallway with somebody, and I walked back in the clubhouse, and they had brought the World Series trophy in, and the entire team was in a huddle lifting up the trophy and chanting my name, chanting Barry.
Wow.
And because most of them were there 2 years before, and they were celebrating the World Series in 10. And of course I was hiding in my locker basically, out of shame. And so they saw the journey, and they kind of, they just really, they wanted to give me some love in that moment. And it was mind blowing.
I love that. Last couple of questions here with Barry Zito. Again, the new book is called Curveball: How I Discovered True Fulfillment After Chasing Fortune and Fame. The book is out now everywhere books are found. When you look back and the people that knew you before Christ and those that know you now, and maybe those people that knew you before Christ that read this book, and maybe they haven't seen you in a lot of years, or that would have a conversation with you, how do you kind of walk through that? I think of people from my high school days that I didn't have a relationship with Christ growing up. Mine was 26, I think, when I became a Christian, and trying to explain to them and talk to them about some of the things that I did in college that I'm not so proud of, and having those conversations, and then kind of stating, hey, something changed in me. What have been those conversations like for you? Because sometimes it's hard for us to just go full blown Jesus in somebody else's, face, if you will, and having those conversations. Have you been able to have some of those and kind of see, some change in some of the people that you knew maybe before Christ, as they say, BC?
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky, right? Because there's so many preconceived notions. Religion becomes so polarizing, right? So most people have had somebody in their life misrepresent Jesus, right? In their church or their youth group, or a family member. And so everyone is seeing through their own lens. And so unfortunately, they're not seeing me kind of as I'm experiencing Jesus. They're seeing me as they experience Jesus, or the lack of, truth. And a lot of them threw out the baby with the bathwater. Right. So, it was somebody at the church that did this, and they said, oh, screw this. And they actually, we don't say that about physics. If the teacher, has problems and they're abusing alcohol, right?
Right.
Physics is still true. It's just the teacher was kind of screwed up. So, that's the thing for me, is it's hard to articulate, but I will say this: I am very much different, but the only difference is that I have a battle going into my mind now when I want to do things that I know aren't good for me, or that are not aligned with Christ. I still make bad decisions every day. I just have this other thing that goes, oh, that's not a great decision. Versus before, I was like, I'm fine. And so, I'm no high holy person by any means. But I do think that people that have had negative experiences will tend to put up that protective shield against anyone that reminds them of their own wounds.
Has it opened up conversation with you, though, to be able to share your faith? I have to imagine, even with former teammates, people like that, it's got to have a cool opportunity for you to go into the world and preach the gospel, as the Great Commission says.
I think so, yeah. And I've taken some training in apologetics and really how to articulate how this all works. And I'm a math guy. I'm a science guy, right? So I'm not just over here going, oh, yeah, I thought all this, and then Jesus came and I forgot about everything else I need, It's like, no, it all adds up to me. I think science and God are actually coming closer together than getting further apart. But for me, I'm learning how to articulate where we can find our common ground, even if it's me and an atheist. Okay, let's just start with what is God? What is a higher power? Let's just call it, did something create the universe, or are we just rolling down the hill of chaos, and we all just kind of ended up falling into all this incredible order in the world and in the universe,
Exactly.
And I start those conversations there. And then we start to see where people get hung up. I think if you just come in harsh with Bible verses, no one's going to hear that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the smartest way to do it. I do it the same way. Let's start with creation. Do you believe that? And then let's go further into, everything else. This has been a great conversation, Barry. I know now you've obviously since retired and you're a musician. You're in Nashville. Your first album titled No Secrets. It's BarryZitoMusic.com is the website. How's the music career going for you?
Music's been great, man. I was able to come out and play with the Nashville AAA my last year and, go in full time to songwriting out here in Nashville. And I'm now getting into music production, and I got the little studio at my house, and just learning how to work everything, man. It's just been so fun, but I'm having a blast and really excited to give some life to these musical roots I was born into with my parents.
I love it. That's awesome. Barry, last question here. We ask this question to all of our guests. What are you learning from God today? Where he's brought you to today as we tape this interview in September. The book's out now called Curveball. You're a writer, you're an author, I should say, a musician, a former baseball player. But what is God teaching you today?
It's funny. That's a great question. I'm reminding myself to ask God every day, what are you doing today, God? What are you doing right now? And if we don't keep our eye on that, then I think we're missing something. But for me, I'm running everything back through the Holy Spirit. Everything. I mean, if I'm making a decision on anything, I'm checking in, even for a couple seconds, not like I'm sitting there, for an hour in prayer, but
right.
I'm just checking in. Hey, is this what we got to do? Okay. Or, I get a little ping. Maybe not. Okay. But I'm always trying to keep God involved and keep the Holy Spirit as my guide out front.
It's great stuff there from Barry Zito. The new book, again, is called Curveball, How I Discovered True Fulfillment After Chasing Fortune and Fame. It's out now. Go pick it up. It's a fantastic read. Barry, thanks so much for your time. Very generous with your time, and just appreciate you sharing your heart and your journey to the Lord. Wish you continued success, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Sounds great. It's been wonderful being on. Thanks so much.
Many thanks to Barry Zito for being here on Sports Spectrum, the 2002 AL Cy Young Award winner. His new book, again, is called Curveball, How I Discovered True Fulfillment After Chasing Fortune and Fame. That book released September 17th, and it's available everywhere books can be found, including Amazon, everywhere else you can buy books nowadays. And you can also check out Barry on social media. His Twitter handle is @BarryZitoMusic. I love the logo design for his picture there with the number 75, which is the trademark number that Barry wore as a pitcher in the major leagues. Great guy, and his website, BarryZitoMusic.com. BarryZitoMusic.com. Thanks to Barry, and thanks to you all for listening. We really do appreciate you checking us out, tuning into the podcast, subscribing, downloading, wherever podcasts can be listened to and found. You can check out our website, sportspectrum.com. That's really the home for all content related to Sports Spectrum. We got articles every day, devotionals to start your morning off, every podcast, lots of archival content. You can read stories from, 1985, 1995. Go back. It's tons of fun to kind of explore and look at some of the stories that we've written through the years at Sports Spectrum. And it's all at the website, sportspectrum.com. And also check out our magazine and subscribe there as well. $18 over at sportspectrum.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time with a brand new episode here on Sports Spectrum. Have a great rest of your day.